my first question really goes out to all panelists, and really is about cities. As we know, our cities will soon be home to about 3/4 of the world's population and are at the forefront of some of our greatest challenges: climate change, ecology loss, human health emergencies, as well as inequality, affordable housing. I think we've all been seeing some of these challenges accentuated as we go through one of the most devastating global pandemics in over a century. So the question really is, how is it that we can transition to a more sustainable and perhaps regenerative model? Can you maybe highlight some examples in your various experiences and work? Pascal, I would love for you to maybe begin with you, and if you could kick us off.
Super. Thank you, Nico. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent.
Wonderful. So hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Pascal Mittermeier. I'm currently based in Boston. And I was wondering if you could show the first slide, Estefania, because I think it'll really set the tone for some of the. So hopefully everyone can see this slide. This is a photograph of the Cheonggyecheon district in Seoul in Korea, taken sometime in the 1960s. I picked this particular picture, but really this could be pretty much any city anywhere in the world. This is essentially how we built our urban landscape in the last 100 years or so. Box houses, asphalt, concrete, everything focused on the car, not so much nature. And in the case of this picture, you can even see a freeway running through the middle of a neighborhood. We designed lots of cities like this. And underneath this freeway is the Cheonggyecheon River, which at the time that this picture was taken was already largely abused to the point of having almost no life in it. And you can imagine what the challenges are of living in places like this: the urban heat, the air quality. So both heat and air quality are now among the most important killers, more than all other natural disasters combined. Also, imagine if it rains heavily in this type of concrete environment, where does all that dirty stormwater go? And then, of course, think of the people living in a neighborhood like this. And so lots of challenges, as introduced by Nico, that I think summarized in this picture. Now, the reason I picked this is if you show the next picture, look at what this exact landscape looks like today. This is the Cheonggyecheon area, the way it looks today. And what a transformation. So the freeway has been removed. It's given life and space again to the river. You can see here there are now 4 species of fish that are swimming in this river that haven't been here since in the last 50 years. This whole area, as you can see, is kind of the 1 in 200 year flood tank, emergency flood tank for this part of Seoul. You can see the plants and vegetation are filtering and slowing down the water as it flows through the town. The temperature in this part by the river is almost 5 degrees Celsius cooler than it is up on the sidewalk to the buildings. And imagine if you're an insect or a bee, or, you know, and you're now flying through the city, and this is your path through the city. You're no longer, biodiversity is no longer just encountering the obstacle of the human concrete world. So really exciting examples. By the way, this is about 4 kilometers long, and was inaugurated about 15 years ago. And look at the people who are back in the heart of the city. And the mayor of Seoul at the inauguration of this project said, this project gave Seoul its soul back. And I think that's a beautiful way to say it. Really, the point that I'd like to make, though, is that thousands of other cities are copying this example. And what's so exciting is there is this deep desire to learn from what other places have done. And the challenge, of course, is how do we go from these kind of very expensive, deeply ambitious mega projects to things that become much more democratic, much more inclusive. And that's really the theme for today's workshop, is how do we replicate these amazing examples like in the Cheonggyecheon, but we don't only rely on developers or architects or city planners to do that. Of course, we need their involvement, but the exciting world of open source and of really making this entire process more democratic is what this workshop is all about. So perhaps, Nico, I'll pause here, and I hope I've set the scene on how exciting the possibilities are and what's what we're able to do, but also how much more we could do if we unleashed a whole new series of tools at our disposal today.
Well, we started this thing called EEX as a sort of a network or a community of people who are interested in creating that layer of sharing, of knowledge sharing, that enables faster scaling and faster reproducibility, especially in conditions which, as Gil was saying, are in places where there's the context, the social reality is one of that you can't afford a huge budget, you can't afford star architects, or even if you could, just because of how the public power works, the budget might run over, or there might be a power transition that causes the project to not get completed. So it's really tied to how feasible and how resilient are these projects. How can we actually create a feasible path to sustainability? So open knowledge sharing, open design is part of the answer to all of that.
Absolutely, incredible and very interesting. I will definitely be coming back to ask a little bit more about the EEX project and some of your other work. Christina Rebel, perhaps would love to hear your thoughts on how we can transition to a more sustainable model.
Absolutely, and just to build on the comments and points of everyone else, because I feel it just adds to it. I completely agree with you, Rafael. The solution that you put forward, Pascal, suggests and shows how once you make the environment participative in the design process, then magic can happen, in the sense that historically, if we think about it from an anthropological perspective, cities came about in the hopes of separating out, isolating us from nature. But now our creative ingenuity allowed us to, let's say, grow beyond the natural limits that the environment could put on us. And now actually there's a huge opportunity, actually a necessity, to tap into our ingenuity, but actually to be inspired by nature. Because if we are to be building regenerative systems, there's no better master and no better teacher than the environment. So in that sense, a regenerative model or a sustainable model has to look at things from a holistic point of view. I love that this Remaking Industry series starts off with sustainable buildings, because it just so happens that at the start of our Wiki Factory journey, quite a few things actually brought us to discuss a lot around this aspect of sustainable living. On the one hand, there was a particular video that inspired me personally. I'll share my personal point first. And it was actually a talk by a beautiful designer called Neri Oxman. She's an architect and a philosopher based at MIT. And she gave an incredible TED talk that said, the Renaissance until now, design was something where we had a man with a block and we would chisel away the design. But nature grows. And therefore, I do think we need to emulate and actually, in this trend of biomimicry, try to see how we can learn and what are the patterns, how does nature optimize its resources to create regenerative systems. Now, second, so when I started at Wiki Factory, I was still working and supporting some initiatives that inspired me, and coincidentally, a lot of them were around sustainable buildings. On the one hand, Passive House. The Passive House Trust was furthering projects around the sustainable building method where actually you do not need heating, you don't need air conditioning, because with smart use of digital tools, on the one hand CAD, and on the second digital tools like in terms of digital fabrication, with CLT panels, you can create a perfectly enveloped home where the air temperature inside is at a constant throughout the year. So you absolutely eliminate the need for an air conditioning or heating system that we know is so wasteful. So I was very inspired by this project, and it was clear, just to go back to some of the points already mentioned, how important it was. So if I heard about, if I spoke to any team leading a passive house build, they would mention how important it was for interdisciplinary communications, that you needed to have everyone in the supply chain talking to each other, and that we needed transparent supply chains and modes of communications for that to happen.
Super interesting. So much to pick up on there, I think, in this discussion. I do want to just segue on one of the things you said last, Christina, which is speaking of metrics. And I think I want to ask the difficult question that I think is on a lot of other people's minds, and I've had this conversation before. Sustainability has become a bit of a buzzword of late. Everyone knows of the Sustainable Development Goals, of course. And occasionally there's sometimes perhaps a suspicion of greenwashing in a lot of sustainable initiatives. So I really do want to ask you all, what makes a design, or for that matter, a building or a neighborhood, truly sustainable? Pascal, maybe you can jump in. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on your projects and what you've worked in.
So I did spend quite a lot of time asking that exact question. And interestingly enough, the most common answer from people who really think about what makes a city sustainable is walkability, cycling, energy efficiency, and essentially using modern technology to figure out where to go and what to do, but then using public transport, walking and cycling to get there and do it. And so another interesting thing to build on what Christina said is, when you walk through a city, when you cycle through a city, you notice much more. You get much more involved in what is going on around you than if you just drive by it in a car. And so this notion of caring about your neighborhood, of being engaged with your neighborhood, is a crucial component, in my opinion, on what makes a city sustainable. And perhaps as a last point, to your question, Nico, is it a buzzword? Sustainability can seem a little bit abstract if you're talking about carbon targets, or you or our values in terms of building efficiency. So, health, equality, inclusion, those are core words, I think, that truly underline what makes a great city sustainable, or what makes a great sustainable city.
For me, some of the most exciting projects is where they take a global design, but they localize it to the local needs, but also to local materials. And I lived that actually quite practically when we first moved to China, in our early days of the Wiki Factory journey. We tried to kind of create a few experimentation projects to see what it would actually take to start up some of these open initiatives. And we actually launched Wiki House China, right? And at the time, with Wiki House China, so we had a team, we took some of the designs, the open source designs, and started to adapt it, only to find out that, oops, the plywood thickness in China is different to that of the UK and the US. And actually, in fact, we'd have to redesign the whole house again. And therefore, actually, only through parametricization would it be possible to have globally innovative solutions that could be adapted to local needs. And I say this, okay, in this case it's plywood, but WikiHouse also brings a very interesting example. Another chapter over in Portugal was able to take the house design and granted, recognize that, you know, in Portugal, there's a lot of cork. Why should we be importing birch plywood from the other side of Europe when we have a whole ton of cork? That would be a more appropriate solution. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. But at the same time, I'm just talking about, you know, CNC fabbed homes. I think it becomes extremely interesting when we look at, you know, new digital fabrication technologies for clay extrusion, especially because indeed the design, you know, the clay extruder, the big robotic arm could be deployed locally. So it's clear that, you know, if we can cut down transportation costs of actually having to move the materials and actually be able to fabricate them on site is very interesting. But if on top you're extruding a clay, then it starts getting interesting from a material innovation point of view for greater potentials for sustainability. And I've seen some beautiful projects. So some friends of ours over at WASP who do some incredible, at different scales, big robotic 3D printing machines for clay extrusion. And they actually identified in I think it was in Ethiopia, that there was a lot of rice husk byproducts of the rice industry. And you could actually, so they created an Adobe for clay extrusion to build an actual home in the local design, of course, but using the rice husk that was the byproducts of the local community. So that rice husk provided the clay, the biomaterial properties that would be optimum for an Adobe style structure that was true to the local culture, and actually optimize even further, because rice husk would create better permeability, would actually have a cooling effect inside the home. I think, you know, what I like about this story is, on the one hand, it's highly innovative, but it's also something that could be deployed in a distributed way, and also tapping into the tacit knowledge of the local communities, because indeed there's a lot that can be done from a biomaterial point of view. I appreciate when I was working at the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products, there's such amazing innovation when it comes to building materials. I think there's that with digital fabrication machines, innovation becomes particularly exciting, because we could, like Gil, be ethical hackers of local materials and apply them to the new manufacturing technologies that could be distributable, like, you know, biomaterials, even perhaps like mycelium, even recycled materials. We have friends in Numina that actually did a carbon zero recycled 3D printing material that could be done for structures too. For me, locality is absolutely key.
Yeah, and just to quickly build on that, I think when we're talking about paradigm shifts, you know, in the old paradigm, if you wanted to go for efficiency, what you did was design once and go for scale, right? Replicate as much as possible on the same design. And again, that works when your context is always the same, it's transmissible, right? When you're designing in the context of a whole system where all the parts have to connect, and you realize that, as nature shows, efficiency is really achieved through context awareness, right? Where you can identify where are the surpluses, where are the strengths and weaknesses of each context, and optimize there, right? So the global optimum is reached through the union of various very different sometimes local optima, and that's connecting back to open design. That's a huge part of why we see this working, right? Because you can get the benefits of some of the benefits of the old paradigm of like having some standardization designs, but then you can go the extra mile and say, well, now I'm going to have to rethink this whole aspect completely, and I can do that. I don't have to wait for the designer, for the company that came up with the original idea to actually go top down and replicate this for any of the tens of thousands of cities or hundreds of different biomes or conditions and so on that one might find, right? So it's really it really combines the best of both worlds, is what I want to say.
Great, fantastic. Gil, maybe I would love to hear maybe some of your thoughts, maybe from a bit more of the hacking space, you know, and how do we hack build spaces to make those more sustainable?
Yeah, I think that I would say that there are three main pillars. The first one is you have to make it cyclical, because you usually are fixing, you usually are taking something that someone doesn't want anymore, and you are repurposing it. That's the core of hacking. The ethos behind hacking is grabbing something and then giving it an objective or a purpose that it was not originally intended to. I think another interesting leg on this three-legged stool would be to make it so that you can update whatever you are generating. So being able to be updatable, it's quite profound. And the other thing is upgradable as well. So not only you can create something that you can keep on putting other parts and making it better throughout time, but at the same time, if you need to remove something and put something that is going to make it better as well. So if you think of those three aspects together, you can say that your negative impact is much less. Whoops, am I back? Okay. So if you have the update, the upgrade, and try to make this as cyclical as possible without throwing away, because let's face it, there's no away. You don't throw anything out because there's no out there. You eventually are going to have to reuse that one way or another, or someone else will. So having those things in mind whenever you are eventually creating, designing, and hacking, I think you are in the sustainable track per se.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I think there's a lot that ties into even what you were mentioning earlier, Christina, on some of the principles around the Wiki house. And one of them that I found particularly interesting was this concept of, it's a Japanese principle of Kaizen, which is allowing for continual incremental improvement in a design. And so I think this question of having designs that are updatable and upgradable is super central to this question of sustainability.
I really like where this conversation is going. So what I love is turning the challenge of something like waste into the challenge of a possibility or a new kind of guideline or guiding principle that you're going to follow that will then unleash a whole new series of amazing innovations and opportunities. So an example I can give on one of my projects in London, we set ourselves the goal, for example, not to use any potable water in the irrigation of a site. So our goal was to capture every drop of water that fell on this development and use it for something. And so now you get into this conversation with your architects and your engineers. Well, now we want a green roof that's going to capture the water. And then your engineer will say, now you need to build a sturdier building because you have more weight on the roof. I'm talking about 20 or 30-story towers, right? So your cost will go up, which is not a good thing. But then your landscaper says, if I no longer need to build underground cisterns or water capture tanks, and instead I can channel the water that comes from the roof into a bioswale or a rain garden, we can even out the cost, the global cost between the structure of the building and the surrounding. And then the salespeople trying to sell the apartment will say, you know, the most difficult units to sell are the ground floor units traditionally. But if the ground floor units are now looking out over a beautiful rain garden that includes wildlife and all kinds of interesting plants, I can sell those units faster or for more money. And so while this doesn't necessarily address some of the things that were brought up around, you know, equality or complex topics like affordable housing, nevertheless, what I'm trying to illustrate is one guiding principle can create this real flow of innovation where all of a sudden you've solved an old problem in a new way, and you're set yourself on a path for really exciting new architecture. And once you've created the notion of ground floor units looking out over rain gardens or swales, there's no stopping you on what the next apartment. We want that same thing. And now you're creating parks. And now the whole park could become a water retention tank for your development, and so on and so on. So I really like how do we take the challenge of wasting something and turn it into an opportunity for real innovation that benefits people, planet, and profit at the end of the day.